Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Walker, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Overland Park Chamber. This interview is being conducted on behalf of the Johnson County Public Policy Council, comprised of the Chambers of Commerce in Johnson County and the Greater Kansas City Chamber. Jointly, we host a site, votejoco.com, which is a nonpartisan site where voters can learn more about the candidates running for office. Today, we have with us Amanda Adkins, who's a candidate for United States House of Representatives. Amanda, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
We'd love to have you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you've decided to run for Congress.
Yeah, I think that first of all, for this audience, the most important thing that I can tell you is that I'm a businesswoman. Many of you may be well aware that I have been a senior executive at Cerner Corporation for the better part of 15 years. I've always worked in areas of emerging business and new strategy at Cerner, as opposed to the legacy business. So I think very important in this difficult time where we've been in the midst of both a healthcare and economic crisis, I come to being a candidate with the experience of having created business, run business. I know what it takes to, I know what's most important in an environment to help grow business. And in addition to that, I have been involved in politics in the state of Kansas for the better part of 25 years, most notably having served as the two-term chair of the Kansas Republican Party. And I'm a mother. I live in Overland Park. I've been married to my husband for 20 years, and I have 2 kids and do a lot of work for at-risk kids and families, specifically focused on education. So I look forward to our time today, and thank you for having me.
Well, we're glad you're able to join us. And why don't we just dive right in with the questions. And what do you see as the top 2 or 3 business policy issues facing the country right now?
Yeah, so in the midst of this very difficult crisis situation we're in, and I'm going to state some things that a lot of your viewers and members already know. I mean, clearly, we have higher levels of unemployment. We have people in general who are just worried as to whether or not they're going to have a job here in the next year. So what I did during the shutdown is I took that time to actually talk with business leaders, in particular small business leaders, even though I've worked for a big business. And together we helped to build a path to prosperity plan, which you can find on amandaadkins2020.com. There are a few provisions that are within that I think are incredibly important in this time period. I do think fiscal restraint, does matter. Many probably know that by the end of this year, we will be at our federal debt will be at about $26.2 trillion. And there are a lot of things that are important to business, but fiscal restraint is one. I do think that related to that, as Congress is considering the next turn they might take, a lot of business leaders have told me that 2 things really matter. Limitation on liability is a really big one that comes up consistently. So that would be a core focus for me. And then the other thing, I'm a really big fan of the idea of a payroll tax holiday. And the reason for that is that it allows workers to keep their hard-earned money, but it also allows business to keep more money that can be used for reinvestment, additional hiring, helping workers to build skills. So I think the most important thing that we can be focused on right now is really, it is the economy. We're in a crisis situation. We need to be looking not just now, but 12 to 18 months from now as to the types of things that will really matter to help us to continue to grow and thrive again. So those are just a few examples.
Perfect. And you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can expand a little more on your general views on federal tax policy.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So first of all, I was a big supporter of the tax cut package in 2017. And I did appreciate the fact that their goal was to make filing a simpler process, but I think of equal, really more importance, I support both the individual and corporate income tax reductions that were in that package. The individual tax rates, most people probably don't know that based on IRS data, individuals across the board in this country received on average a 1.5% cut, which I do think really matters to families in the US and specifically in Kansas City. I definitely support making the individual income tax rates permanent. In addition, because I have worked for a large business, there were some really positive permanent steps that were taken in terms of corporate tax rates. We did significantly reduce the burden from 35% to 21%, making companies in the US so much more globally competitive. However, I think that there is additional room there. Ireland, as an example, has a corporate tax rate of 12.5%. So we definitely, I am a proponent of continuing to cut corporate tax rates, because that is money that, again, can be spent on salaries, on hiring, on additional investment to really spur growth in this community in Kansas 3.
Well, as you are well aware, the pandemic has created a lot of problems for individuals and families and businesses. And so, from a business perspective, what would you propose, if anything, to provide further relief for businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic, and especially to encourage recovery and economic growth?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think that one of the most important things that we could do for businesses, it really is to focus on limitation of liability, so that there is an additional expense, just as a starting point, as we continue to, we're still in a healthcare crisis as we continue to work through this difficult time period. But the second thing is, in terms of stimulating business, I think the best thing we can do is not necessarily to spend more money on the part of the federal government, but to allow businesses to keep more of their hard-earned money, which is why I'm a big proponent of the payroll tax holiday idea. And you're talking about, and again, I'm sure a lot of people know this, but that overall tax is roughly 15%. It's split equally between both the worker and employers. So that is a good amount of money that could be leveraged and used for reinvestment, additional hiring, et cetera.
Absolutely. And looking from an international perspective, what are your thoughts on international trade and tariffs?
Sure. Well, first, I'm sure your viewers and members are well aware that the state of Kansas, roughly on average, there's about $9 billion. We benefit from about $9 billion of exports. So I'm a big proponent of trade. I think that trade equals jobs. Many are probably also aware that on the high end, most of our trade is with Canada, Mexico, and then China. I do think that at this point in time, based on our experience with China, it makes sense for us to pause and rethink the challenge of China. If we're going to do that specific to business, because you're talking about roughly $600 million in exports to China from the state of Kansas, I do think that we will need to consider, how do we expand the scope of trade elsewhere, and specifically in Asia, and looking at doing more with Japan, potentially doing more with India. Clearly, we've already got a free trade agreement with Australia. So my goal is certainty for business and continued growth. So I do think that we need to pause and look at our partners. But what I seek for the state of Kansas, and specifically for Kansas 3, is that we continue to grow and have opportunities to sell our goods and services in the United States and around the globe.
And before we leave the international stage, let me just ask you about your thoughts on national immigration policy, and specifically, do you support employment-based immigration reforms to assist with workforce shortages?
Yes, I do. I absolutely support. I think immigration is a workforce issue. We are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws. I think it's important to state that I think security and immigration is critical. I have publicly stated for quite some time that I do support a border wall in certain areas. I also do support very high-tech surveillance, in particular as it pertains to the southern border. But I do think that immigration is a workforce issue. Now, right now, because unemployment is still relatively high, and I know a lot of Americans appropriately are sensitive to us first sorting through the skills that our people need and how do we get those people hired and working again. I think we have to take that into consideration. But my hope would be that we can build a meaningful long-term plan for immigration that is really focused on workforce. I think that does require the American people to take a step back and to have a real opinion on where we have deficits and labor shortages. I know that before we entered this crisis situation, if I use construction as an example, it was projected that there are 1 million jobs this year that we're going to go unfilled in construction. You can go on to the other extreme. Clearly a lot of companies struggle in terms of hiring engineers. And so we as a country need to have a real opinion as to where the needs are, what skills do we need? If we're bringing people in more so on the unskilled side, how are we going to train them up, help them to assimilate into the United States? But I think ultimately at the core, the positive path that we can take on immigration is to really focus it on workforce needs long-term.
And I guess this is a good time to transition to some more domestic issues. What are your views on long-term funding solutions for our transportation infrastructure?
Yeah, I've had the good fortune. I come from a builder family. My father, recently retired from having run a large heavy construction company. And so I've come up, with a family belief system that infrastructure is important to the country in terms of security, in terms of moving goods and services. Clearly in the state of Kansas, given our history with Dwight D. Eisenhower and the early work that he did in building infrastructure in this country, I'm a believer in that. I also do think that the most important thing that we can do is to really empower state government, local officials to determine what the priorities are for a state. So, and then, the last thing that I would say is I think that the complexity, so I'm a big supporter of infrastructure. I want to really focus on what the needs are, as determined by the state. I think the last thing that we do really need to sort through is if we need a national plan and we need to determine the best possible way to pay for it. And I'll just say, I would like to be on the record there that I'm not a proponent of increasing the federal gas tax. I think that we should look for more local measures. So, having a conversation about state gas tax might be another avenue, but it's most important to me to be aligned with the people here. I think people do support infrastructure. They think it's important, but we need to figure out the best possible way to be able to fund it.
Absolutely. Another really big issue for individuals as well as businesses is the cost of healthcare. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on the federal government's role in our healthcare system.
Sure. I have also been on the record that I believe that Obamacare the most important issue in healthcare for most people is affordability in healthcare. And unfortunately, Obamacare did not solve for that. I do think that we should repeal it, just to be very direct in making that statement. Even here in the state of Kansas, the actual cost of healthcare for individuals went up from 2013 to 2017. I think it was by like 106%. I have worked in healthcare crossing the entire United States and here in this community for the better part of 15 years. So I have a lot of experience working with employers, with health systems on strategies to have high value offerings to families. But most important, when I think about healthcare, it's very personal. I look at it from the perspective of being a mother. What are the needs of my own family? And very simply, there are three things I think that matter. It's smarter, more transparent, more affordable. Smarter. I know that the most important relationship that I have in healthcare is with my provider, with the physician, with the nurse. I have an expectation that my care and the care of my family is coordinated. I have an expectation that we're being thoughtful about the resources that are being used in order to help me and my family to be healthier. Transparent. I want to know in general what things cost so that I can make decisions for my family. And then just on the affordability point, and this is where there is a really big difference, I think, between Sharice Davids and me. I think that decisions and the power of decision making should be in the hands of the individual and the family, and or state governments to a certain degree, not the federal government. I do not support expanding the role of the federal government in our healthcare system, which is again one of the reasons why I support repeal of the ACA. So smarter, more transparent, and more affordable are the cornerstones of the things I think are important in healthcare policy.
Well, and my last question for you is more general, and tell us what you think distinguishes you most from your opponents in the race.
Sure, I'm happy to comment on that. We are in the midst, I'm a candidate for the Times. We are in the midst of a healthcare and economic crisis. And I come to this race having very deep experience in both healthcare and in business, and knowing what it takes for businesses to be profitable, and knowing the types of decisions that need to be made for us to continue to grow. That is actually a really big difference between me, certainly me, and Sharice Davids, but also the other Republican primary candidates. Nobody else can say that they have both deep healthcare and business experience. Based on that, you know, we are the only campaign to have released a policy plan. As I mentioned earlier, my Path to Prosperity plan is focused on fiscal restraint, tax relief, immigration specific to workforce, and the types of changes that we want to have in healthcare so that it's smarter and more transparent. And that can be found at amandaadkins2020.com. For all these reasons I just cited, I've had a lot of both regional and national leaders who have chosen to endorse me. A very notable one, and it's a span from Ted Cruz to Jeb Bush. In the case of United States Senator Ted Cruz, he chose to support me because he named me on his 20 in 20 list, 20 leaders to lead this country in 2020. Because he believed that my experience in business specifically in this very difficult time period was critical, in addition to, of course, our shared belief system.
Well, that's it for my questions. I wanted to leave you a few minutes to be able to close with anything you want to say, and then we'll wrap it up.
The only thing that I would like to say for any viewers is that I am honored to run to represent Kansas 3 in our United States Congress. As I've mentioned several times, I think that the experience that I bring to the table as a businesswoman, as a mother, as somebody who has done a lot of work in politics and been successful in the state, that those are all key things that you should take into consideration. I'm Amanda Adkins, and I'm asking for your vote.
Well, Amanda, we want to thank you so much for your time today. I know you've got a very busy schedule. I want to remind everyone that advance voting, both in person and mail-in, is currently active. So get your ballots in if you've received them at home. And then primary election is on Tuesday, August 4th, and the polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Thank you. I appreciate your time today very much.
Thank you.